What happens when AI becomes more than a tool? When it becomes a thinking partner in classrooms and labs? What about bias, privacy, and being human in an AI world? Welcome to Speaking of Higher Ed, Conversations on Teaching and Learning. I'm your host, Andrew Everett. This is episode 32. Today, my colleague Arthur Takahashi talks with Dr. Jason Orlosky, a computer science professor at Augusta University, about how AI can boost faculty efficiency, improve student learning, and respond to our cognitive and emotional needs. Here's their conversation.
Our guest today is Dr. Jason Orlosky, Associate Professor of Computer Science here at Augusta University, and also adjunct faculty at Osaka University in Japan. Dr. Orlosky brings a unique global perspective to the evolving intersection of artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and higher education. His research explores how we can make intelligent interfaces safer and more usable, improve human-computer integration, and better understand how the brain interacts with machines. He's been awarded funding from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science and also the U.S. Office of Naval Research for his work in intelligent augmented reality and cognitive symbiosis. So today, we'll talk to Dr. Orlosky about how we, professors, instructional designers, and academic leaders can use AI not just to automate tasks, but to also work smarter. So Dr. Orlosky, we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's start with the path that brought you here. What led you to your current roles at Augusta University and Osaka University, and how did you come to focus your research on AI, augmented reality, and intelligent systems?
So originally, I'll give you a brief history of how I got interested in technology in the first place, which was way back when the iPod got released. And there was a product next to the iPod called the Arcos Jukebox. And it had a hard drive internally, and you could put as many MP3s as you want on it. And I saw that and I thought to myself that the ability to compress information, put lots of information on a device like this was just the coolest thing. And that's when I knew I wanted to go into technology and developing sort of mobile devices or technology like that. So fast forward a few years, an undergraduate degree in computer engineering at Georgia Tech later, a couple of years of work in the IT healthcare industry. And I realized after working in IT that I wanted to do something a little bit more creative with my time and with my life and career. And so I decided to travel to study abroad to Japan and to work on mobile computing because it was sort of an up and coming field at the time. And to do that, I studied Japanese language at University of Georgia for a little bit, then went to Japan and was matched with an augmented reality laboratory over there, which happened to be a very good fit in terms of the research I wanted to do, the culture, and my professor, Kiyoshi Kiyokawa, who was an excellent mentor. And then that led to my research in augmented and virtual reality, and integrating AI was sort of a natural path for that, for intelligent tutoring systems, for example. So I started adding artificial intelligence, eye tracking, and as of 3 years ago, moved back to Augusta, Georgia, my hometown.
Oh, so you are from here?
I'm from, so since I was 6, I grew up in Augusta.
Okay.
Went to Lakeside and then Georgia Tech afterwards, and then all over until back here 3 years ago.
All right. And so what projects and experiences helped shape your thinking about how AI could support or challenge the work of educators?
So one of the first AI sort of products or systems that I remember that really influenced me was Alice. And I forget what the acronym stands for, but it was one of the first chatbot systems. And I put in a prompt, answered or put in some questions, and I got a response back. And I said, you know what? For education, it wasn't that great. Like the responses weren't perfect and they didn't really adapt that well. But I thought when this technology matures, it's going to improve the scalability of education in ways that we've never thought possible. So that was sort of my initial exposure. And of course, with recent large language models, that technology has progressed a lot. And now those are much easier to integrate into the research that we do.
So how long before ChatGPT was that?
Oh, that's a good question. That was probably back in my days at Georgia Tech, maybe slightly after that. So early 2000s, I would say, about 20 years ago.
Okay, so chatbots were
They were a
available
thing. Yeah.
back then
absolutely.
already. All right. And what are some specific ways that you currently use AI tools to improve your efficiency as a faculty member? So that can be in the classroom teaching or even your research or administrative work.
Yeah. So majority of my work is in research, and automating things, especially via code, allows me to be much more productive. So I give an example for eye tracking research, for example. Coding something in a language like C++, which is not my specialty, took quite a long time. So to build an eye tracker way back in 2017, I think it was, took almost 2 years. Not full-time working just on that project, but it took such a long time. Now with large language models, tools like ChatGPT, the coding process, that process that used to be very sort of painstaking and doing sort of the engineering work that took a long time but wasn't really intellectually productive, that happens on a much faster scale. I can use tools that do that for me on a much larger scale now. So instead of copying code snippets, I can have an AI tool generate a larger program for me, which saves lots and lots of time, especially in my research.
So that's one term that we've been hearing a lot, vibe coding. Is that basically what you're doing?
So that's...
If you can explain what vibe coding is to our listeners.
So I have seen on social media sort of what the term vibe coding has been assigned to. I think that it gets a bad rap because a lot of novices use it without understanding. They will use it for coding when they maybe don't have a computer science background, and the results can be sort of dangerous in a sense that they might not know what they're doing with a piece of technology. But before the term vibe coding came about, having a large language model generate code for you it's basically like using a calculator way back when for math, right? It's just making yourself making the work that you do more efficient by automating a portion of it. So I don't want to associate what I do specifically with vibe coding, but in a sense, yes, I think a lot of people would say, oh, what he does is it falls under the category of vibe coding.
So it's vibe coding with a lot of computer science knowledge to help you out.
Yes, vibe coding with a lot of computer science knowledge, and a little bit different than what most people associate it with.
Okay, sounds good. And so what kinds of tools or technology, AI tools that is, or technologies do you find most useful in your day-to-day academic life?
So as I mentioned, ChatGPT, one of the large language models, that online service, those new models are quite good for generating code. I say that in combination with Python, the flexibility of Python and the ease with which you can access different tools or packages like OpenCV, which is Open Computer Vision. It's a computer vision package that allows you to do various operations for image processing, for example. And the combination of Python and large language models, other large language models such as the Llama series. So Meta has a tool called Llama, which allows you to run various models that they've come up with. The series called Llama, essentially. And they function similarly, but you can run them offline. So they're small enough that you don't have to have an internet connection. I can run it on a laptop, take it with me. I can run on a plane without an internet connection. So using those large language models in conjunction with software packages like Python and Open Computer Vision and those types of tools, that's mainly how I use it to be more efficient.
Have you noticed that one larger language model like ChatGPT is better at specific coding than others, or in general they're all good?
It depends. So they're all pretty good, I would say, especially the more recent models. The older models like ChatGPT 2 are not quite as good as the new ones in terms of coming up with the solution that you're looking for. None of them, unfortunately, are trained on, well, let me take a step back. So what I do is research, right? The type of work that I do is completely new. I'm tasked with finding creative solutions to problems that don't exist yet, the solutions of which that don't exist. So the tough thing about that is that since OpenAI, these large language models are trained on existing information, they have no idea about something that doesn't exist yet, right? They can replicate patterns and sort of find sort of novel solutions to existing problems. But if I say, write me an eye tracker from start to finish, there's no way I can get it done. So in that sense, the usefulness of each of those tools is quite good for writing a block of code that I know how it should be designed. I can craft a prompt for any of those tools that would produce code that I know what it's going to do, essentially. So
it just does it faster.
Does it faster, or it might be a little bit closer to the output I'm looking for. Okay. It might take fewer iterations, fewer prompts and reprompts to get to the solution for using ChatGPT versus an offline Llama model. But most of them are fairly good. There some of the newer models like DeepSeek, for example, have inherent biases. So they're trained on specific subsets of data that may not be as accurate or may not do exactly the thing that I want it to do. But in general, they're all quite good at producing code.
And without getting too technical, but could you perhaps explain like one problem that doesn't have a solution yet that you're trying to figure out the solution for using large language models?
Sure. So for example, eye tracking. So detecting the pupil in a camera image. So most eye trackers have a camera that is facing your eye. It takes an image of the eye. Some of them are actually attached to your head, like near eye cameras. They take a picture of the pupil, and the goal in eye tracking is to determine where the center of the pupil is and where you're looking in the environment based on where the center of your eye is, the center of the pupil is, and the relationship between your head and the environment. And to do that, to find an accurate pupil ellipse can be very difficult when there's other light sources in the scene. So you might get reflections on the eye. The LEDs, the infrared LEDs that you're using to illuminate the eye generally aren't perfect. So you have these sort of perturbations or errors in the image that make it very, very difficult to track exactly where your pupil is. And there aren't many solutions that exist for this. It's sometimes termed as a Red Sea in terms of like it's sort of an unsolvable problem, or when you solve one aspect of it, another problem comes up. And it's hard to do in a very efficient way. So large language models basically can't handle that. If I say, here's a series of images, develop an algorithm that handles pupil ellipse fitting on these series of images, it will fail in a massive way currently. Yep. That may not be the case 10 years from now, but those types of visual problems, it still has a lot of trouble handling those and needs researchers to solve them.
Okay, gotcha. And so we're hearing more about AI agents. Could you explain to our listeners and our viewers what AI agents are, and also, how faculty, college faculty, should be thinking about AI agents?
Yeah. So the quintessential failed example of an AI agent was Clippy. I don't know if you remember Clippy from the Microsoft.
Yes, from Microsoft Word. Yeah, right. Yeah.
The most annoying AI agent ever in existence, right? You'd always just, no, I'm not writing a letter, I'm writing an essay, right?
So that was already an agent.
That was an agent, yeah. And agent, right? If you think about agency, it's unlike a large language model where you put something as the input and it returns the input back. An agent, it has maybe some proactive approach. It has some agency in what it does in terms of interacting with you. So let's say I'm walking through the environment and I have a virtual agent, one of the more recent ones, so Cortana, Microsoft's Cortana. It was, I think that name was made popular through the Halo games. You had this virtual assistant that would come and explain, oh yeah, your next navigation point is here, or, oh, the enemies are on the way, you need to do this, right? And the agent had agency in terms of it would proactively reach out to you and tell you to do something or provide the next waypoint, et cetera, right? So agents are not really yet prevalent in too many commercial products. That's changing with products like Microsoft's Copilot, for example, something that helps you write. Another good example is in Google emails. When you start typing a sentence, it populates the rest of the sentence for you, right? Or in Google search, for example. Yep. In a sense, that's a type of agent, and that it's, even though you haven't asked it to complete the rest of the sentence for you, it's taking some agency and actually doing that for you.
Gotcha.
So I think the inclusion of agents will be very specific use cases like that moving forward. So like Google, or like helping you write something better than Clippy used to do in the past. But in the sense that there is a very autonomous, interactive, like you feel like there's another person or a robot interacting with you, I think that's still some ways away. I think AI in general has trouble understanding human intent. And until that problem is solved, I don't think agents will be a huge part of what we do.
But do you see that being like the near future or not necessarily that near?
I think I would just say I don't know. It will depend heavily on this problem called goal alignment and how autonomous like large language model systems can get. Goal alignment just means that the autonomous agent's goals are aligned with your goals. So you can think about it as just understanding your intent, right?
Yep.
So I want to write an essay. How well does the autonomous agent understand that that's what you're trying to do? And how helpful is it in that? I think that's still probably on the order of at least 5 years out before we have really good, effective agents that we can interact with in productive ways.
So when it comes to goal alignment and AI understanding kind of our intent, something that I've seen with ChatGPT at least, once we ask a question, it will give us the answer and then a question kind of anticipating our needs. Is that what you're talking about in terms of intent? Like, so for example, if I ask, I'd like to create exam questions for this specific topic, it will maybe generate that for me and say, well, now do you want an activity that can help prepare students for this exam? So that's kind of like what I'm seeing with ChatGPT, at least the latest version.
Sure. Yeah, that's one example of it. Right.
Okay.
So if it understands what you're trying to do, it can prompt you, the user, right, the human, and help you better accomplish the goal that you currently have at hand. The broader spectrum of goal alignment is how do we align AI in general with humans' needs in general and make sure that our goals as a species are aligned with what we're programming large language models to do.
Gotcha. So we're talking about broadly, not for specific tasks like this.
The problem of goal alignment is generally spoken about in those terms, but your example with the prompting the person is a good sort of very specific example of goal alignment. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So some faculty, we know just in talking to faculty, they worry that AI may end up replacing them, right? So what is your take on those fears?
Yeah, so it's a good fear. I should say they should probably think of it as a concern, right? Like any technology, the Industrial Revolution replaced factory workers, and that was a good thing, right? We figured out how to do things more efficiently, and it was better for the world as a whole. I don't think that will happen overnight with AI, especially for education, simply because the good education is based on a relationship between humans. So educators and students, there's a trust relationship there, for example. There's a mutual understanding mutual understanding of, let's say, a professor and a student and what the student is struggling with is extremely important in the success of that student. And with large language models right now, they usually don't have a holistic view of what a student might be struggling with. They might be understanding what an individual problem or something a student doesn't understand about an individual problem, but they might not understand that, the student's going through financial hardship right now. And that's what's causing them to, not show up to class, for example. So I think the human relationships will be extremely important, or rather, they will prevent AI from just replacing professors, teachers over the short-term future. So it's good to be concerned, but I don't think it's so immediate, right? And I think also faculty should be open, teachers should be open to utilizing AI because it's here to stay. Students now have access to a broad range of information. It can help faculty automate their teaching tasks, and it will be an extremely useful tool in education as a whole, I think.
So that's kind of like the shifting mentality that you think faculty should adopt from now on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mentalities, but yeah, to be open to it and to understand that students will use it just like they use the calculator, and how the calculator has amplified their ability to do more computations. This will function in the same way. Of course, there are problems with over-relying on it, right? Problems with cheating, which we could also talk about those. But just to have an open mind, I think is probably the best.
All right. And in your view, what kinds of academic tasks are best suited for AI, and what tasks do you think? And I think you touched on that a little bit, but what tasks will still be like human led?
So I think it's important to understand how people learn and what types of tasks are intellectually productive. So a good example is your calendar on your phone, right? Originally, we had calendars and we had to write everything down, and we used the calendar as what's called cognitive offloading. So what we would otherwise have to remember on a day-to-day basis, we have now offloaded onto a piece of technology. It used to be paper calendars, now it's our phone calendar. That's something that we shouldn't be remembering, right? Our day-to-day calendar, it disappears. After that day is done, it disappears. That information is no longer useful to us in terms of us needing to be able to recall it immediately, right? So those sort of redundant tasks or non-intellectual tasks are perfect for what AI should be doing on our behalf, right? Something that doesn't intellectually stimulate us, but that takes a lot of time that we could otherwise be using for an intellectual activity, right? So identifying those tasks and automating those, I think, is completely fine. The problem comes with, for example, when there's a math problem or a computer science problem as homework, assigned as homework, and I just say, okay, ChatGPT, just solve this problem for me. That's something that's important for me as a student to learn how to do that problem and to fail at it so that I can learn why I failed. Mm-hmm. If the answer is just given to me, I don't learn anything, right? Same with languages. Hey, translate this for me, and I just get the translation. So there has to be some balance between us learning, struggling, having errors, the trial and error process to retrain our own brains, but also using AI in the same process to reduce some of those redundant tasks. So, for example, if I don't understand a problem, I try it, and then I say, okay, here's what I tried. Why didn't this work? And I can think through why it didn't work, but I might not have all the information, right? I might not understand something about this programming language, or I might not understand just syntax, for example. And where I would typically go out to a Google search and say, okay, what is the syntax, right? And it would take a long time to find that information, right? That sort of redundant or that non-intellectual task, the actual searching for it. Mm-hmm. That time can be shortened. So the time to get to the information I need to learn is now reduced because tools like AI can synthesize that information and return us the information that we're searching for more quickly. So there's got to be some balance between us going through the trial and error process and AI returning that information to us in a more efficient way.
I think that's perhaps a good way to address cheating with our students, right? Since you mentioned the issue with cheating, and I know that's top of mind with all college professors in this day and age. So what are some perhaps tips that you would give or suggestions that you would give college faculty when it comes to cheating?
So if we look at the purpose of education, it's so that students learn, right? And as long as they learn the material, from my perspective, I really don't care what they use, right? If turning in the assignment is important, it's an important way to show what you learned. But as long as you learn the material, I'd be okay with no assignments whatsoever, right? Although I'd have to verify that the learning happened. Mm-hmm. So one example, for example, what I do, I teach the senior design course, senior capstone, and students have to go out and they have to solve real world problems. And each week, instead of submitting an assignment, they get up in front of the class, and they talk about what they did and their understanding of it. So they're forced to, they have some notes, but they're forced to re-explain. And we, as in myself and the co-instructor for the course, we ask questions that if they don't know the material, they're going to struggle through it.
It'd be very clear.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's part of the credit for the assignment, right? If you can't explain the work that you produced, let's say you just got ChatGPT to do it for you, you're not getting credit for the assignment, right? So that's not always true. I mean, not all courses. It might be difficult for every student to read their entire essay and explain about the essay, for example. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of courses where the assignments require an understanding of the content, students should be getting up in front of everyone and saying, "This is my understanding of it," right? And if there's some gap between their understanding and what they actually produced, it's the job of the professor to say, okay, why is that? And how do we teach you? How do we make sure that you've actually learned and close that gap?
Yeah, so are there ways to verify that students have actually understood the content and done the work?
Yes, I mean, oral explanation is one of the easiest, right? Currently, I'm sure there are other ways, like having a student interact with a professor-designed AI, for example, in not in a black box, but without access to external materials, and have an AI quiz them, but like have an intellectual conversation to determine their level of understanding. That would be one way to automate the process. But in the meantime, having them orally present, whether that's part of a team or to each other as a team, right? Or in class, doing joint coding. For example, I'll have a team of students come up to the board and say, okay, here's a coding problem. I want you to each take turns, write one line of code, and it's your job as a team to solve this problem and make sure each of you understand what you're going through. So orally explaining what they learned is a good way, since they don't have access to notes or tools, right? Yep. For them to show what they learned.
Gotcha. And some of your research is in cognitive symbiosis. And you touched a little bit on that, but can you explain what that means and also what that could look like for college faculty and higher ed professionals?
So that is probably, I would say, it's a subset of goal alignment, right? It's how do we get intelligent interfaces and large language models and all this AI that we have to understand what we as humans are going through, right? So if I'm depressed and trying to code, it's probably not going to be good, right? In terms of my output will be reduced because of my mental state. Right now, because AI tools have no idea of our cognitive state, right? They can't say, oh, you know what, this person must be stressed or must be sleepy or must be depressed or they could be depressed, right? That's going to be affecting their work. Let's try to solve that problem instead. So the research that we do seeks to, one, using, for example, eye tracking or cognitive state recognition based on their actions or performance to see, okay, maybe their cognitive state is currently altered for some reason, whether that's stress, tiredness, whatever. And is that affecting their performance? And if so, how do we reinforce or change their cognitive state or improve their cognitive state such that they can perform better? So that's what cognitive symbiosis, sort of one of the definitions that we use. How that will affect students, I think, is cognitive state recognition using computer vision, eye tracking, monitoring student behavior in class. Just like a teacher, if you're in class, right, you look at a student, they're bowing their head, they might be nodding off, they're not paying attention, right? What's wrong? Did you get sleep last night? No, you didn't? Okay, go home, sleep. Let's start again anew tomorrow, right? And detecting those states in a more automated way so that the instructor can engage better, can understand what the students are going through and not necessarily have to observe every student for the entire hour. That's sort of the strategy we're taking in terms of understanding their cognitive state and addressing whatever issue they might be going through.
So how far are we from actually being able to use those kinds of technologies in a learning environment?
So it's already possible. We have interfaces, for example, just monitoring students' behavior in class to see if they're interested or not. Those are available from a research perspective. They're not quite productized yet.
Okay.
There's a lot of issues with privacy, for example. They're not 100% accurate. So students might have the opposite effect sometimes. So they're still being tested. We're still working the bugs out to make sure that we really can determine cognitive state accurately and that we're not accidentally misunderstanding what a student's going through. We also have some interfaces that are completely virtual. So within virtual reality, for example, we can track what people are looking at within a text and determine whether they completely read a passage, whether they actually understood the passage, and then give them a study aid at the end. Like, you know what? There were 2 sections out of the 10 sections you just read that you really didn't read. You might want to go back and check those right before you take the quiz. So those are the types of interfaces that exist, but they're not quite mature enough in terms of the accuracy, in terms of their scalability to larger classrooms, for example, because not every classroom has a virtual reality headset in that sense. So there's still some problems to be solved, but they are available sort of for testing in the current day and age.
That's interesting. And have you seen any research on like if students know that they're being observed by AI, if that changes kind of their behavior?
Oh, that's a good one. Off the top of my head, no. Although there are a few papers on the over-reliance on AI. So a lot of students tend to overuse it, and it sort of reduces those intellectual processes that I was talking about before. But certainly AI agents, for example, if there was, just like a lot of people worried that their phone is listening to them, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking about cats the other day, and now I'm seeing cat commercials. Oh man.
Yeah.
And if some of the AI tools get injected with advertisements, then that's very possible as well. So, so certainly privacy issues are huge.
Yeah.
We're looking at some of those, or the School of Computer and Cyber Sciences looking at some of those as a whole. But yeah, we haven't studied them well enough yet, I would say.
Okay. And we're also hearing more about what is called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Could you explain what that term is, and kind of, what that means for higher education?
Yeah, so artificial general intelligence. So before I talk about that, let's talk a little bit about intelligence, because we have to define intelligence before we define general intelligence. Yep. And one of the definitions that I've heard that I think is the most appropriate for this discussion is the ability to solve complex tasks, right? So we as humans, we're faced with a huge number of complex tasks throughout the days: motor coordination, cognitive tasks, higher intellectual tasks, and we solve those, day in, day out. And artificial general intelligence, there are many definitions, but I think a good one is that when an artificial intelligence entity has the ability to solve the same tasks on a broad spectrum that humans can also solve, those complex tasks, then that defines artificial general intelligence. So in terms of certain intellectual tasks like chess, AI is already better than us, right? It's basically impossible for humans to win anymore at certain games. For accessing information quickly, right? Even Google search is a form of information return, right? It's not quite AI, but it returns information at a rate that humans, if I had to go grab a book, look up the information and bring it back, right? Or, even just recalling it from my own brain would take some time, right? So that type of AI agent, if you will, or that type of AI interface has already exceeded human intelligence in that way, right? That's typically referred to as narrow artificial intelligence, right? Solving a specific problem better than human does. So that broad spectrum of problems, including, for example, us empathizing with each other or understanding each other, having mutual understanding as humans, is part of that set of tasks. So until artificial intelligence, in terms of its planning, goal setting, mutual understanding, empathy, the huge range of emotions and cognitive abilities that humans have, until it can do those on a level that's about the same as an average human being would, that's, I think, when artificial general intelligence will have arrived, so to speak.
And what does that mean for higher education? And are we perhaps close to this, or not as close as some people argue?
A better question is, what does that mean for humanity? Okay. Because now if you've achieved artificial general intelligence, and that artificial general intelligence can copy itself, then all of a sudden we're a population of, however many, 8, 9 billion, whatever the planet is right now. Now you could have a population of 1 trillion of artificial general entities, and who knows what's going to happen then, right? So the good news is, I think, one, we're still some ways off from this. Large language models have shown a very good ability to replicate, I dare use the word mimic, but to solve complex tasks in a way that is very close to what we do intellectually, which is a good thing, I think. It still lacks a lot in terms of goals, the goal alignment problem, right? Yep. So right now it's just it returns information, right? It doesn't go out proactively and do things or solve problems, which it shouldn't yet, I think. So until those other problems are solved, I think artificial general intelligence is not going to be here. And in that sense, large language models are sort of a narrow piece of intelligence, but they can certainly do a very wide range of tasks in terms of intellectual, writing essays, writing books, programming, and education.
So thinking in terms of the evolution, the rapid evolution of AI and potentially, achieving AGI in the next, few decades or so, do you see the future as, are you an optimistic or pessimistic or kind of neutral right now? So where do you find yourself in that spectrum?
Right. So I'm kind of all three. I'm probably neutral in that sense, but I have deep concerns about how humans will build and use AI. AI right now, I think itself is neutral. It doesn't proactively do anything bad or good. It responds to how its users behave.
Okay.
So if I say, for example, how do I go into ChatGPT and you know what, I want to harm somebody. How do I build a weapon? Right. That's a person using a tool to generate information that will help them harm somebody. Mm-hmm. It's just like a car, right? If I jump in my car, I can use it to get to work. I could use it to drive into a crowd of people, right? So AI currently highly depends on what the intention of the end user is, just like any other tool. So my concern is that as AI and as we get closer to AGI, is artificial intelligence going to start resembling some of the negative characteristics of humanity, and how far will it take those, right? How much does it amplify humans' ability to do harm in those cases? I think the good news is that most people that are currently developing AI they're researchers, they're people that work for companies, right? Larger organizations. They've gotten there by being very intellectual about the process. There are a lot of safeguards in place such that, so for example, they're monitoring exfiltration. They want to make sure that the AI doesn't become cognizant and jump out and infect other systems, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that we have generally good ethical people working on these problems, I think is makes me positive and makes me see a very promising future for it. But the rogue company or the country who decide to use it to do harm, that's my real concern. I'm really more afraid of humans than I am of AI, if that makes sense.
Yeah, gotcha. So how can college professors prepare themselves now for this future of AI?
So there's lots of ways to do it, but I think the biggest one is going to be taking the mindset to always be learning about new concepts, new technologies, new AI that's coming out, and getting your hands dirty. So understand what large language model means, understand how your students are going to be using it, and get as much information. You became a faculty usually by getting a PhD, right? Which is doing your research, doing a literature review, testing, running experiments. The same should apply throughout your entire academic career, right? If you're a professor, go get on, a couple different tools, use it to generate images, interact with it, ask AI how students are using AI, for example, right? So to get as much information, to keep an open mind, and to understand and to talk with your students and understand how they're using AI tools, I think that's the biggest thing that faculty can do to prepare for what's coming along.
So if you were to recommend like 2 or 3 of those AI tools that faculty should absolutely start playing with right now, what would those tools be?
So it's very highly discipline dependent.
Okay.
So a tool that I might recommend for like someone in the art department would be completely different for computer science. But the good thing is, so one tool, sort of the progenitor, or one of the biggest initial tools that was successful was OpenAI's ChatGPT, right? And it's free to use, just their basic model. And you can ask ChatGPT, you can say, hey, I'm a professor or faculty member in the art department. I am looking at generating images for some medical documents that I need to produce images for. What kind of AI tools are out there? And ChatGPT actually now has the ability to go search the internet and return those tools for you. So it can actually interact with information live on the internet and help you. So I would say yeah, go ahead, try out ChatGPT first. It's probably one of the most impressive tools, and it can introduce you to other tools that will help you in your specific discipline.
Sounds good. And my next question has to do with your experience in Japan. So how are Japanese universities and Japanese faculty approaching the use of large language models and just AI tools in general? And if there's something that we here can learn from them?
So I don't have too much recent information. I've been in the US for since August, so a lot has happened since then. But over the past couple of years, as OpenAI and other tools became available, I saw in Japanese universities a quite conservative behavior in terms of this is a very new tool. We need to sort of take a hands-off approach and observe what happens. And so, for example, there was a set of authors. There's a paper that was attempted to be published not by a Japanese entity, but someone tried to publish in a journal with ChatGPT as a co-author. And there's a whole, so IEEE, all these publishing, ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, they got together and discussed whether authorship for an AI tool is appropriate. The answer was no, because it can't take responsibility for its actions. But Japan saw this and they're like, okay, let's take a step back. We need to, let's be very careful about using these tools. The downside of that was a lot happened very quickly and a lot of automation happened. And the tools, I think they missed the boat a little bit in that sense.
Interesting.
However, the really good thing about that approach and the good thing about, I think, how Japan and Japanese institutions approach the problem is that they took a very good analytical and planning approach in terms of they wanted to understand how to best use the tools to benefit Japanese society and society in general. Right. So if you've ever been to Japan, it's a very sort of society community. They look out for each other, right? Or they look out for society in general, right? How is this going to affect everyday living for people, right? So they asked those questions. And that was very good because they were able to identify the uses of AI that really were beneficial for everyone, not just, for example, how does a company make money with AI, right? So that approach, I think, the West, America, Europe, we could learn from that, and we have. And a lot of AI organizations started by saying, how do we develop a system that's going to benefit everyone mutually and not just be owned by a couple corporations? And that's how it's evolving. So I think that approach, maybe the West learned from the East in that sense about how do we take an approach that's going to benefit society and not just one or two companies.
And have you seen kind of that approach in the classroom, like a specific example from a Japanese faculty or a Japanese university?
Not too many specific examples, but from guidance from Osaka University, now the University of Osaka, had a recent name change.
Okay.
But there was guidance, I think about a year and a half ago on the use of AI tools. And part of that guidance was just what I described in terms of when you're using AI tools, and this was to faculty, students, everybody else, think about not only understand that you're responsible for the outcomes, but think about how it's going to impact the university, your colleagues, society. And in any decisions you take, make sure that's in the back of your mind, right? That you're taking that into account when you're using these tools.
That's interesting because I don't think I've heard that argument in the US, at least.
Right now it's about, there's a lot of purposes for developing AI. I mean, we're a capitalist society, right? We've been educated and grown up in an environment where it's very individualistic, right? But I think that's changing. A lot of companies and their CEOs understand that there has to be some a fair distribution of the output of these tools, right? And I always like the example of I think Warren Buffett said this, but if you could press a button and generate like infinite resources, right? And how would you distribute them? In a sense, we have that button now, right? Tools like ChatGPT, they provide seas of information. They can automate all these tasks. And we now have the button to be able to, give it to everybody. But capitalist society has traditionally been, no, let's figure out how we make money from it first, right? I think that mentality in the U.S. and in the West, so to speak, is changing slowly.
Well, and so my next question, and I want to end this part of our conversation before the break, talking about ethics and safety, and we touched a little bit on those. But what should faculty here in the U.S. and here at Augusta University as well be thinking about when it comes to data privacy, bias, or transparency when they're using those AI tools?
So the AI tools are very wide space. And I think it's important to recognize that the tools are trained on specific data sets. So ChatGPT, for example, is trained on a huge corpus of information taken from public data sets, like all of Wikipedia, for example, right? DeepSeek, for example, right, it comes from an Eastern organization, and it's trained on a subset of those that don't include, for example, if you ask DeepSeek about the history of Tibet, it's a very, very different explanation than you'll get from ChatGPT or another tool. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's important to understand which organizations have trained those tools, what information has been used to train those tools, and whether or not certain barriers are in place or certain purposeful mechanisms are in place to limit the outputs or change the outputs of information that are coming from those. And they're all testable. I would say go into any tool, let's say it's a large language model, right? And ask a few, not scandalous, but questions that might have controversial answers and see what you get. And you'll very quickly understand what sort of biases come from those tools. So you mentioned, I think, security and privacy, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Treat any AI tool that has an online component. So if I'm going out to a web interface and asking a prompt, think of that as you putting out that prompt on the internet so that everyone can see it. That information, there's no guarantee that information will be kept private. Some companies do that, but I would say, treat it like a loaded gun, right? Anytime you're putting in a prompt, if you're putting in student information, anything about medical conditions, ensure that is anonymous, right? And pretend that you're posting it out on the internet on, NewYorkTimes.com, right, for everyone to see, and think about it from that sense. And generally, you'll be pretty safe with privacy and security if you do that.
So if you have research data, probably not good to post on those AI tools.
It depends on the research data. Yeah. So if it's data about patient information, absolutely not. That's totally confidential, right? If it's, for example, let's say I'm a professor in biology and I'm wondering, is there any information about how cells multiply in a specific way to my research? Asking that question, right, about publicly existing available information is a good use of it. Right? Okay. But anytime you get information that's identifiable, or for example, if you say, here's my proprietary algorithm, make it, optimize it, right? That algorithm, whatever you put in there, is now publicly available. So that our society is changing. We might have a system in which it actually benefits everyone to put not confidential, but proprietary information, and they get some credits for it, financial credits for that in the future. But as it stands right now, and based on current intellectual property laws, anything that you put on there is basically public property, you could think of it as. So anything confidential, sensitive information, research information, you should not be putting online.
Stay with us, and when we return, I'm going to ask Dr. Orlosky our continuing the conversation question.
Got a teaching idea worth sharing? Share it on AU Teaching Commons. We are Augusta University's first peer-reviewed hub of open teaching resources by faculty for faculty. Share your knowledge, help your peers, impact students. Visit us at guides.augusta.edu/AU Teaching Commons.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for our continuing the conversation question, the part of the show where we explore what's on the horizon in higher education. In today's question, we tackle the future of AI in higher education with Dr. Jason Orlosky. So Dr. Orlosky, here's my question. How can faculty and students prepare for this future with AI?
I think there are many ways. So one I already talked about, and that's being an outside of the box thinker, right? Since AI is trained on existing data, how can you push the needle forward for things that AI can't see in the future, right? And I think doing research, being creative, and again, that outside of the box thinking is one important thing to cultivate in your mind as you approach any career. The second thing is developing more human skills, right? So understanding each other as people, being a good listener, and just mutual understanding of what other people are thinking, how other people are feeling. I think that's one aspect, that connectivity between people. That's something that AI will likely for a long, long time not possess, or at least for the near foreseeable future. So just be better human, and I think you'll be fine.
All right. And my last question is, if our listeners or our viewers would like to continue this conversation with you, is there a way that they can reach you, maybe on social media or email address?
Yeah, easiest way is to reach out to my faculty address, jorlosky@augusta.edu. I also have a Discord server called JEO Research. You can access that through my YouTube channel. Just search Jason Orlosky on YouTube and I'll show up. And yeah, I'd love to discuss interesting topics and questions and research.
All right. Thank you so much again for being part of our show today. And I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it as well.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Higher Ed. You can find all episodes and more on our show page at augusta.edu/innovation, and continue the conversation with us on Facebook at facebook.com/AUGCII. Speaking of Higher Ed is produced by the Center for Instructional Innovation at Augusta University.